Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Vedic Conversation, where we invite our guests to talk about a number of different topics through the lens of storytelling and from the perspective of the Veda, an ancient but still very much relevant body of knowledge from India. I'm Anthony Thompson, a Vedic meditation teacher based in London, and I'm joined by my Vedic colleagues Derrick Yanford in New York and Rory Kinsella in Sydney. In this episode, our guest is Michael James Wong, a meditation and mindfulness teacher based in London, who over the past 5 years or so has built a number of communities and gatherings which give people the opportunity to turn up without expectations of how they're supposed to be or how to present themselves. As I personally discovered when attending one of these occasions, this can be a profound experience. They are simple, quiet moments which allow people to remember things that they already know, but which over time have been lost. He has also been instrumental in making a significant contribution to the wellness and yoga scene in London over the past decade, bringing in leading teachers from the USA and Australia to open up what is available and bring it all together into one community. Michael is a busy man with 3 podcasts, 2 books, and offers 3 programs ranging from mindfulness to meditation with yoga. Let's get into this fascinating conversation, and don't forget to stick around until the end, where we'll share with you how you can become involved in the conversation. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, guys. Hi.
I'm delighted you've got time to be with us with such a busy schedule with so many podcasts, books, and events going on.
No, I mean, it's an absolute joy to be with you, and I appreciate you reading out the laundry list of activities. But dare I say that this is a beautiful way to spend a bit of time with you guys today. So thank you for inviting me in.
No, thank you. We're very pleased and delighted that you're here. Just to get things going, you are, I know, a past master. You're a master at getting huge gatherings of people together and creating an amazing atmosphere where people can sit in stillness, in quiet, and you give them an environment, an occasion when transformation takes place. Can you tell us a little bit about how that started? What's the inspiration for that, and where you intend to take it?
I mean that's very kind for you to say that. I mean, my work as a teacher has always been built in the essence of building community and celebrating spaces in which people can feel a sense of belonging, whether it's in yoga spaces, in meditation spaces, in any spaces where people can just feel that they can show up without needing to kind of be on show. And so with Just Breathe, which is an organization we started here in London about 4 years ago now, was always rooted in the idea of giving people the opportunity to experience something that is arguably a bit quieter, arguably a bit less, but also through the same lens of familiarity that they would see in their normal lives, whether it's through dance, music, culture, spoken word. And we sneak in mindful moments, a meditation practice, conversations with strangers, all the little things that maybe show people that these practices have a lot of value in their lives. And so what we did was at an earlier time, in those early years, was just create space for it to happen. And originally when we did the very first event, it was myself with a musician from New Zealand named Arlie Lieberman, who I think maybe some of you guys know. We said, you know what, let's just put on this event and see what happens. Let's invite all of our friends. Let's tell the different kind of yoga and meditation teachers in London about it. Let's see if we can twist a few arms of people who wouldn't come just to kind of come in and see what happens. And in that first event, we were hoping 30, 40 people would show up. A lot of people like yourselves who are probably already 2 steps in and, asking you to bring a friend and a next door neighbor. And on that first occasion, about 300 people showed up because it was just something different. And back then, and it's not long ago, 4 or 5 years ago, back then it was revolutionary. Come to a space where nothing happens. We advocate the idea of it's the most uneventful event you'll ever come to, right? The most difficult thing is maybe deciding, do you want to sit on the floor or do you want to sit on a chair? And, trying to give yourself that space. And so over the course of a few years, the community's really grown, and it's really just been about continually offering and being of service in that space. And we've just found that people have really responded in a way of realizing there was such a need for it, but there was no place to go for it. And so Just Breathe has grown into this very beautiful community and space in these events. Anthony, you've been to some yourself, where people can just feel this warmth of being in a place with people that arguably are all strangers, but are all there for the same reasons, not needing to show up, not needing to say what you do for work, not needing to tell you all the things they've done that day. And it's been a really great place for people to feel a sense of welcoming. And, throughout the years, we've continued that trajectory to really create those spaces. And it's been such a rewarding experience to see how people shift and transform in those moments where they can come in a little bit closed up, unsure, nervous, by themselves, and they can walk out with, 5, 10 new friends, a big smile, and have just had a wonderful evening.
I can certainly vouch for that, because I think I came to one of your very early events. I think it was in Brick Lane in the east of London.
Yeah.
And I went alone, and there was a big crowd. And one of the most memorable moments was when you asked everybody just to turn to the person next to them, just to couple up. And we were all sitting on the floor. And you asked us to move close together so that our kneecaps were touching. So my kneecaps were touching the other person's knee, a complete stranger. And I think it was 3 to 5 minutes of just looking into the other person's eyes. And this was just the most extraordinary experience. Not just for me, but for everybody. It was a young lady that I was looking at. And, to begin with, it's just amazing. How long do we ever spend looking into somebody's eyes? Even our loved ones, we don't spend that much time unflinchingly looking into their eyes. And the volumes of language, of conversation that passed between us, unspoken, simply through the eyes, was quite extraordinary. And at the end of the event, there were people in tears. There were because they were so happy, because they had just through look released an enormous amount of tension, enormous amounts of blockages. And I thought, I just took my hat off to you there, and I just thought, wow, if you can get people, complete strangers, to do that without saying anything. And it was just so powerful. Do you continue to do that?
I would say this year it's been a slightly different momentum of events. To say that we're sitting knee to knee, eye to eye, face to face is probably a little bit of a stretch for the past 12 months. But that experience, it's a big one. All of these are very kind of basic mindful practices where we kind of just shine a light on the things that as human beings we actually forget or we need, but we kind of spend so much of our lives ignoring, right? We spend a lot of our lives projecting outwards, talking to other people, looking at a multitude of things. And a lot of the practices and a lot of these little moments is how do we just actually slow things down and allow people to be seen, allow people to be heard, allow people to be appreciated, allow people to do only one thing at a time. And what I'd like to say, this was an epiphany moment of an exercise that I said, this will change people's lives. It's nothing new, right? It's things we learn as children to say, if you've ever been around a 5-year-old, you say, hey, slow down. Hey, chew with your mouth closed. Hey, look me in the eye when you speak to me. As we get older, we just forget these things because we get so tempted by how exciting the rest of life is. And so a lot of the things that we do at these events is just helping people remember and remind the things that they've forgotten. And so they are very special moments. And, even over the past 12 months or 15 months during lockdown, we've held different events, usually through an online space. And while they're not exactly the same and the formats and the exercises change, it's that same ideology and a lot of the same methodology that says, how do we remember to be human? How do we remember to connect? How can we make it practical yet available in a way that people can actually see an expansion and transformation? And that's been a really interesting kind of experience over this time, kind of in lockdown, but something that's really kind of solidified how valuable it is to have strong human connection, moments of touch and connection, listening, participation, community, conversation. These are things that are essential to our nature. And it's something that, for me at least, is really important to continue to put the effort and the service in to create those spaces, even if it's just 2 or 3 people that show up, or if it's 300 or 400 people that show up. Just having that space available for people has been something that has been a really, really beneficial thing for our community throughout the time that we've had.
One of the interesting things I think we've all noticed over the last 18 months as we've spent more time digitally connected is that, particularly with a platform like Zoom, there is no overlapping conversation, that we have to listen carefully for the conclusion of the other person's comment before we then come in. And I think this has actually been a very valuable lesson for all of us, that we're not in such a hurry to throw in our ideas or our comments without any thought at all, that we're even more considerate, more thoughtful about our response, and not afraid of the pauses, not afraid of the gaps, not afraid of the silence. And we live in a noisy world where silence is a rare commodity. And for many people, it's a terrifying commodity. It's a terrifying issue, that they feel that that's the moment when they're at their most vulnerable. So do you think that in the months to come, as particularly here in London, in the UK, lockdown is easing and life is kind of returning to a resemblance of what it was before, do you think that the live events are going to swing back in, or do you think there's still a place for the digital platform?
I think there's a place for everything. And I actually really like the way that you kind of talk about Zoom being a moment in which we learn how to pause, to listen, to kind of get involved. As humans, we are, built off the basis of relationships, interactions. I've kind of found that over the past year on Zoom, it's a bit like learning or teaching everyone how to dance, right? It's a bit like it only works if you're listening. You realize that most times you're doing it together. And for a lot of people, they just kind of make it up as they go until they've had to kind of say, okay, me go, then you go, then me go, then you go. I suppose at the beginning of lockdown, everyone was kind of trying to lead. Everyone was stepping on each other's toes. Everyone was trying to just kind of boogie their way through how the Zoom thing works. And if nothing more, as a benefit over the last year, maybe we've all learned how to lead and to follow, how to listen and how to be guided. And I think that's a really beautiful learning and awakening for a lot of people, me included, all of us included, to say, actually, you go, I go. This actually can have a bit of space, the amount of times on Zoom where there's been an internet freeze or someone's connection is bad and someone's mid-thought and everyone's like stuck with their face open and all those kind of things. All those kind of little speed bumps or little blips in the music have actually taught us so much about how to actually maybe better dance with others. And I think that as we come back into the live environment, I think online and offline will be interconnected. But at the same time, those in the live environment will actually appreciate real conversation with a lot more cadence than maybe what we used to, and kind of saying, as you're talking, I'm just ticking in my head when I'm allowed to talk. So I'm not actually processing. So as Anthony's lips are moving, I'm just saying, me, 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 me. Okay, I think I got enough of what he's saying. Let me tell you what I think. And at least hopefully, as events come back and as we bring our events back later in the year and next year, we'll stay available so everyone internationally can be involved. But at the same time, that rhythm of live interaction hopefully will become something really evolutionary or revolutionary through this time together in kind of a lockdown kind of environment.
You mentioned dance. Am I right in thinking that dance plays quite an important part in your life?
It used to. Probably less as much now. I probably would call myself, a really enthusiastic wiggler. Whereas maybe growing up, there was a little bit more form and technique. But movement's always been a strong part of my life, whether it's through dance or sport or yoga or kind of other practices. I come from a family that's very outdoors, very active. Um, but all of these things have really just been kind of tested this year, and most of my dance moves have been in the living room or in the sitting room, and I suppose we kind of have explored that in our house with myself, my girlfriend, and my puppy in different ways this year.
I'm curious about um, the contrast between where you are now in this space and holding these events and doing all these things, and the idea of where you might have been like 20 years ago. Do you think what you're doing is something that you had envisioned a long time ago? Or is it completely opposite? You're finding yourself doing and being in a space that you had never imagined and just kind of organically were filling a need.
I mean, 20 years ago, life was completely different. But looking back in hindsight, like most people, I can see how it's naturally come to this. I mean, I grew up in Los Angeles in Santa Monica. And so being around the quote unquote wellness environment, yoga studios, meditation teachers, all these kind of things was kind of part of my adolescence. Now, at the time, I had no connection with it, but obviously you could walk down the streets of Santa Monica and there was still, arguably 5 or 6 yoga studios that were easy to find and people knew of. Whereas maybe if this was, a different city, that wouldn't have been on the radar. Growing up and going through college, when I first finished university, I went to UCLA. I started working in entertainment, in events, in marketing, in doing things potentially, arguably cooler and more exciting, as you do when you're 19 years old. And I naturally found my way into working on events, working on things where people came together in live environments. But some of the events back then were music related, sports related, entertainment related. But it was still people coming together for these kind of once in a lifetime moments that you could see a whole shift. There was something sacred and special about being in those spaces, even if they were coming together to play a basketball game or they're coming together for an award show or whatever it was, or just a big kind of wedding or birthday party. And so I think from an early age, I really gravitated towards creating those spaces, or at least being a part of those spaces. I think early on I was never part of the creation team and more part of the kind of support team. How can I just be here to help moments happen? And I, as I kind of made my way through high school and college, that's when I started to find my way into the yoga practice, into a meditation practice, into those communities. But those were always just passion side projects. Those were things that were my escape from kind of the busyness. And I can say this honestly, back then I never had any intention to make it my business, to make it my work, to make it my day to day. It was I go to work, and then I go to yoga. I go to work. I have my morning practice. I have my my wellness friends who I could go and get away from all, and I had my business and life friends who you could talk about taxes and strategy and all those kind of things. I think for me, where the road started to converge was when I kind of started to take the practice more seriously. Being in LA, I was very lucky to be surrounded by great teachers, wonderful people, people who were arguably pioneers of the Western kind of culture of these kind of practices. I then had what I call now a little bit of luck, where I got fired from a job when I was 24, and I said to my parents, you know what, I'm just going to go live with my brother in Sydney. I'm going to work in a pub and live on the beach for 6 weeks. I moved to Sydney. 3 weeks later, I had a full-time job and never made it to the beach, but stayed there for 5 years. But during that time is when I got entrenched in a really beautiful community down there with yoga and meditation. Rory, you might know kind of the whole power living community down in Sydney, in Melbourne. And I kind of, that became my home, that community, those teachers, those peers I was teaching. And so it just became a whole shift of lifestyle. And as well, I kind of moved away from LA, so all the glitz and the glamour stayed there, and I kind of left. And I just naturally and slowly it became more and more interesting to spend time doing things with people who were kind of in the same space. Um, and so they've kind of worlds have come together. And then, 10 years ago, I moved to London. And at that time, it was kind of like going backwards because I was like 2 steps ahead, 1 step back. And no offense, Anthony, it's a bit like, coming from LA and then going to Sydney. Those are two communities worlds ahead in the wellness conversation, just like New York is, places like Vancouver. Coming to London 10 years ago, there were always studios, there was always people, there was always teachers, but it wasn't a common conversation. And so even those first 5 years, I kind of did my own thing. I worked, I went to studios, I did my own personal practice. And then as London kind of caught up with the wave of wellness that kind of swept the island, things started to come together in a very beautiful way where I had already been teaching for 10 years. I had already been part of the community for 15 years. But now there was more interest, there were more moments, there were more opportunities, there were more initiatives. And it's now kind of created this beautiful swell of where we are now. And part of that was myself and a few other people in our community kind of making a conscious choice. London is here at this time. How can we do more to bring the global community to the community here in London by things like we did with Just Breathe, like the welcoming in of different kind of trainings, different programs, a lot of different visiting teachers. And I always kind of found myself as a link outward because I had a big kind of global family and a big global community. I just happened to live in London. And I was always kind of the LA teacher who lived in London. So anyone who was coming from the US said, hey, hang out, check out Michael. If anyone coming from Australia or kind of other parts of Europe, like, hey, connect with Michael. And there was always 1 or 2 degrees of separation or connection that kind of made it such a global community in London in those times. And now we're here and it's caught back up and everything now is moving in a beautiful kind of direction together.
I mean, certainly the London scene has changed out of all recognition in the last decade. I mean, I've been practicing yoga for nearly 20 years, and I was one of the odd ones in the sense that as a man in the class, I was in a distinct minority. And the city of London and the financial district, if you were seen wearing a suit and carrying a yoga bag, yoga mat on your back, you were a freak. Today, if you're wearing a suit and not carrying a yoga mat, you're a freak. It's a complete volte-face. It's completely changed, and you've had a major impact and influence on that, particularly not only with your own personality and the input that you've given, but bringing these other teachers in and making them feel comfortable and getting them to recognize that there's a huge need. There was a huge need here. Which has been met, and you should be justifiably proud of the way that the UK yoga and wellness scene has changed due to some very important things that you've done and contributed.
Oh, I appreciate that. I mean, to be fair, to be honest, I take no credit from it. I mean, I'm very aware of how lucky I've been in my life, in my path as a teacher. Not everyone gets to grow up in Santa Monica where you're surrounded by 75 yoga studios and meditation studios. I was lucky enough to be in Australia where all of the teachers, my peers, were 50-50 men and women, and so these were all kind of central narratives to my life that were really uncommon to everyone else, but they were just the way that I kind of came through this community. And so when I'm coming to London, it was just very much about kind of opening a lot more doors for people to say, it's not what you think. Early on, we started a project called Boys of Yoga, which was really about celebrating, bringing men into the conversation. It wasn't actually to create a divide. It wasn't like, here's the guys over here, here's the girls over there. It's actually just saying, we all think there's a front door to yoga, but actually there's a side door, there's a back door, there's a window, you can climb down the chimney. And growing up in LA, I grew up in a surf skate culture. Rory lives in Sydney, surf skate culture, all those kind of things. There was a lot of guys and people like myself who came from a different background. I just couldn't see myself in the room. So this was just about how do we create that awareness and hold up a little bit, not a mirror, but how do we create windows into the studio, into the community, that people can feel that comfort of, oh, I can see myself, I can see my friends, I can see, the benefit. Because what I tend to say with things like yoga and meditation, it's getting you, once you're in the room, the practice does the work. It's just getting people into the space to realize the value is there for them. And that was really those early moments in the trajectories of things like Boys of Yoga, things like our training programs, to how do we connect and bring different teachers into conversations, and how do we create movements like Just Breathe that show people everyone's welcome. So that's really been the essence and the spirit of it. And that's, being that London's my home now, it's really about bringing the global perspective, bringing the full perspective of these practices into a space where everyone can see the full benefit, as opposed to maybe the most popular or the most common one.
So you've mentioned a lot about the importance of bringing people into physical spaces, and that event-based community idea. And I know that Just Breathe, we mentioned the app before. How do you kind of how's the relationship work between those, like a fully digital thing where there's no interaction or minimal interaction, and that whole idea of it's all about bringing people into the space?
Yeah, I mean, so when I talk about community, obviously the easiest underpinning of that is live environments and getting people into the room. The essence of it comes from the idea is it's not about a physical space, but a place of belonging, a place people can feel themselves in, a place that people feel comfortable. When we originally put out the first beta version of the app back in 2019, it was really a support tool. It was come to the events, have these big, beautiful moments with friends and strangers, but also keep this in your pocket so you can feel connected to it until the next time we come back together, right? It's maybe a little bit like, the bracelet that you wear for a month after your favorite festival, or all those kind of, those things that, how do I stay connected to this energy or this essence? And so with the app, it was very much about, okay, well, use it every day if you really feel connected to it. Maybe use it once a month. Use it as a timer. Use it as nice music in the background. Use it as a way to just kind of remember and remind yourself what that experience was like. Now, obviously, as things have digressed over the past year, it was how do we give our community more when we can't be together? And so as we expanded the app this year, it wasn't, again, about creating separate ways in which to be involved. It's how do we continue to be in the places that people are, especially in the environment, and allow them to feel a part of something more. And whether that is, now there's something upwards of 200 meditations on there, whether meditations, breathing practices, nice little insights, words of wisdom. That becomes a community in its own right, where while people have a individualistic use of the app, right? Most times you do it by yourself, or you do it kind of at home with one other person. It allows you also to use the tools that are to hand, social media, emails, all those kind of things, to share. The amount of times we see a day, people go, they post up a little kind of, this is the practice I did today, and other people going, wow, this is really beautiful, I felt the same way. It gives people kind of that first question or the first conversation starting point, and it gives that connection that kind of keeps us all together. And my hope with it, and the hope with it that we have with the team, is as the events start coming back together, what's going to happen is you'll see people have gone, oh, wow, well, I've been using the app, I've been a part of that community, I've been part of our online events, and it creates a way in which people can really communicate and connect without saying, hi, Darren, what do you do? Hi, tell me all the things that are cool in your life. And it's like going, wow, I've practiced. We've practiced together, even though we've practiced apart. And so that was really the motivation behind creating that app. And it also allows us to expand past physical spaces and really feel that anyone and everyone who wants to, or has an interest to, or has a need to, can feel support, which is why the app itself obviously is built like let's call it a traditional mindfulness app. But also at the same time, we have a lot of initiatives where if people need it, they can't afford it, they want to do more with it. We have so many initiatives that support that, whether it's, kids under 18 will have full access to the app for free. people who need it. We have certain programs that we're building out now where a lot of medical and clinical professionals can prescribe the app as something as a support tool for their patients. We're trying to take it a step further so it's community oriented, not just individually supportive. And I think there's a lot of programs out there in the world right now where we're supporting the frontline staff, and that's hugely important. But the frontline staff are frontline staff because they care and they support and they're acting of service. How can we help them do more with what they're already doing? And so for us, as the app, as it builds and expands and it grows, it's continue looking at different initiatives, programs, organizations that we can continue to support with, while also being really connected as a community and giving people a way to feel in touch with other people.
Michael, can I just turn to your book? Tell me, when did you have the idea for this? Because it's not what one would imagine to be a typical meditation book or a book written by a meditation teacher. And when I received it, I was really very pleasantly surprised. Tell us a little bit about the conception of that.
Well, it's a funny story because obviously it's not a meditation book. In many ways, it's a book that we've been calling a book of gentle wisdoms. In the spirit of meditation, as you guys all know, most of our job or our work is helping people remember things that they already know, helping people see things that are right in front of them. I wrote this book in the depths of lockdown in 2020, when at the time I was shielding, so I hadn't left the house in about 3 months, just purely because I have quite bad asthma, and so at the time, especially in London, there was this big kind of warning and panic that if you're in this category, don't get past the front door. And so, I've obviously written a book before, and writing is a big part of my own well-being. And at the time, I was already developing a different book. And actually, I'll share this because it's quite funny. The book at the time we were developing was this book called The Uncertainty of Everything. And I was speaking to my publisher and my agent, or my literary agent, and they sat me down and they said, this year, that's not going to happen. Right? They're very honest of like, the idea is nice, but the reality is you picked the wrong year to write that book. And I said, fair. They said, what we think is needed is something gentle, something simple, something that is supportive, something that's hopeful. And obviously, for me, the essence of my writing has always been, how do we give people a sense of hope? How do we give people a sense of community? And so then I went away and I said, you know what, give me a little bit of time and let me have a think of how that sits with me. And during this time, I was, lots of things had canceled, lots of schedules had changed, and so I arguably had more time, and so I was able to sit with things and just see, right? And I was chatting to friends, and people were saying, look, I just need little reminders, little stories, little things that are just kind of quaint and gentle. And so the idea came from a tradition that I grew up with as part of kind of Asian cultures, Chinese, Japanese cultures, but also at the same time, the paper crane, which is something that probably all of us can connect with on a universal level. It's a symbol of hope. Obviously, it has East Asian origins, but it's something that also at the same time, we all have kind of this nostalgic connection with, whether we've folded them ourselves or seen them in displays. And, there's a tradition in the practice that if you fold 1,000 paper cranes in a year, you're granted a wish of hope, long life, longevity, good wealth, fortune, all these kind of things. And so at the time, I had said to myself, even before we turned it into a book, was, I think I got a year available right now, right? It kind of said, I feel like this is a good year to recommit to this. I'd done this when I was a kid, maybe 8 or 9 years old. And Anthony, you might remember this, we always have done these as little activities at past Just Breathe events. They were already kind of a symbol of the work that we were doing. And so I personally committed to that project, and I started to do it, at least for the first few weeks. And then it kind of dawned on me, maybe there's something here to share. And so combining that kind of metaphor with a lot of my own personal learnings, little life lessons, a lot of little messages and thoughts and quotes that I had heard or learned along the way, and just brought it into a space of just a series of short stories, little proverbs, little moments that are mindful in their creation and thoughtful in their digestion, but isn't a heavy lift, isn't a heavy load. and we was very lucky to have great support from the team to create that book that not only is hopefully simple and gentle, but is beautiful illustrations. It's built in a way where everything's tactile. It's supposed to be a practice in its own right, reading and moving way through that book. And I'm very delighted by how it's turned out, and really appreciative of how it's been responded to. And it's been really nice to kind of have a little writing project like that during lockdown that's actually come to life, that actually has been able to kind of spread its wings, arguably, and be shared.
It's certainly a book. It's kind of quite weighty, but as you flick through it, there are beautiful illustrations, there are quotes, and so on and so forth. And you just mentioned that you have a team that help you put this together. Do you employ people to help you in the background? Do you have a support team?
I mean, nothing I do is in isolation, and we wouldn't be able to do any of these projects without support from key people and from lots of different people. I have a team of 2 or 3 people that work with me on all of our projects. There's a woman named Nikki Priest, who's an amazing designer, creative illustrator. She's also the illustrator for that book, who can do so many amazing things with her hands, who's been part of the journey with me for almost the last 10 years, creating all the projects that we do. But same with the app. We have a team of developers who build it and maintain it. We have a studio that we record in it. We have producers that put everything together and edit things. I'm very lucky in the sense that, we have podcasts, and that the only job I have is to open my mouth and start moving. And I think there's a lot more people that I surround myself that are far more skilled and far more articulate in creating what we put out there. And so I think for me, it's very much to not only be grateful for that support, but also to be a big advocate of doing things together and ensuring that everyone has a place within it, and also everyone's recognized within it. So short answer, yes, absolutely have teams of people, and especially when we do our events, we have loads of volunteers who support it, but also the same way we do a huge amount to ensure that we give back and support, and that people's time is never taken for granted in any of the things that we do or create together.
I'm just curious because I love the way that you described getting people into the room. Like, there's so many different ways. And I think in my journey, I am trying to discover how I can participate in alternative ways of letting people into the room. And I'm having discussions with my colleagues about creating more diversity, equity, and inclusion in the spaces that I create and participate in. And it sounds like your spaces are very inclusive and very diverse. I'm just wondering, do you feel like you have a great representation of all different types of people in your spaces, or are you recognizing that it's catering to a particular demographic?
I mean, it's a great question, and I think the answer is always going to be in 2-part. I think for us, yes, I think we have representation, but I also think there's always a need for more and more space and more conversation and more inclusion. And I think now these days there is an aspect of people who are really ensuring that lots of voices are heard and spaces are created for that. And I think that's still just the very beginning of it. I think for me, what I've learned is that, we play from our own personal experiences first. Myself, I'm from an ethnic minority. I'm a man in a wellness space. I'm an immigrant and an international. And so, but I'm also privileged in the sense of how I've been brought up and how the spaces that I occupy. And so, being self-aware of your own unique perspective has to play into how you create spaces for others. There's one thing to say, I'd love to have more diversity and inclusions in all our rooms. It's different coming from me as it is from you, Darren, as it is from Anthony, as it is from Rory. Nothing's better than the other. It's just understanding the way that in which you are opening a door or creating a space. The important thing for me is to surround myself with people who know more than I do, and to have a far wiser not far wiser, but have a consideration of things that I may not understand. I think sometimes as teachers and as community leaders, which we all are, we can easily maybe be misillusions that we need to have all the answers, or we must kind of know the first best next step. And I think the honest and the most appropriate thing, especially in these days, is to say what you need, to say how you say what the vision is, but not knowing the map to get there. Recently, we've had some really good conversations within our community of teachers where, I was talking about, we'd like to bring more spaces in for diversity into our teacher trainings and these kind of things. But at the same time, we have a diversity board within our teacher training programs for our yoga and meditation courses. One of them is a guy named Michael who lives in Nigeria. He's African. He's a strong, bold personality. We have Grace, who's a white Westerner, British, but she's also a clinical social worker, works with underprivileged and at-risk children. And so even sitting with them, and there's a few others, but they're a good example of they agree on a lot and they disagree on a lot. Some come from a personal point of view and others come from a clinical or societal point of view. And a lot of times both are right. And so it's about having those conversations and making the space. And if I go back to that analogy of opening doors and windows, a lot of times I've found that when people talk about diversity and inclusion, it's kind of like saying, oh, well, we've opened the back door for you. Well, why do I want to walk through the back door, right? Just because I'm a minority, me going through the back door doesn't make me feel like I'm just as welcome in the room, right? Sometimes it's saying the party's outside. We don't even need to come in the room. Sometimes it's about saying, you know what? Great idea, but this needs to come from someone else, right? It needs to come from this voice. It needs to come from this space. I need to ensure that the decision is coming from those who have good context. And so I always kind of, especially working with a lot of teachers, because we do a lot of mentoring and do a lot of community growth mentoring, is how do you have a vision that's expansive and inclusive, but how do you do that in a way that it's not about you? It's not about Darren's opened the back door for everyone. Anthony's letting everyone through the side door. Rory's hosting a party that you can all come to, right? How do we decentralize the person to make the space more inclusive for everyone, right? A lot of times it's like that thing of, when you go to the park and you have a lovely picnic with all your friends, you don't need to know who owns the park. You don't need to know whose name is on the sign as you open the gate to the park. You just want to know that space is welcoming. So that's what we've tried to do, and at least what I've tried to do with all of our projects, all of our trainings, all of our initiatives, is how do we decentralize the individual to ensure that the space is welcoming, and then surround ourselves with people in both leadership roles, but also in contribution roles that can really make sure that everyone is heard, everything is considered, and then also know you're never going to get it right all the time, right? And so if you get it wrong, apologize, start over, start back. If you get it right, it doesn't mean you're done either. It means keep going. And sometimes we might see out there that there's aspects of performative inclusion. Oh, well, we've let one black person into our training program, we're done. Oh, well, there's 3 Asians that already come into our training program, so we've ticked that box. Whatever it is, and I'm not trying to cast a tick box on those kind of aspects, but we want to ensure that we're making a space that's welcoming for everyone and creating equality and equity in people's involvement, rather than just inclusion for the sake of the doors are open for everyone to come inside.
So that makes me curious to this question then too, because it sounds like, from your perspective, like creating space and community kind of based on your own personal perspective of how you view the world. Can you speak a little bit more about, for your own, in terms of meditation and yoga, your own personal practice, what does that look like? Because I'm imagining that you have multiple different influences, maybe from Vedic, Buddhist, or whatever kinds of meditation, that allow you to see how there's many different paths. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just curious what your own personal practice looks like.
No, absolutely. I mean, I was probably very dogmatic when I first started these practices. I'm someone whose personality can sometimes be all in when I find something I love, and again, that's a great thing in a lot of cases. Early on in things like a yoga practice, I found the type of practice I liked. You know, it was vinyasa, power vinyasa. I found these teachers. This was life, right? I only practice in a hot room, and if you didn't practice yoga in a hot room, why are you practicing at all? All these kind of things, right? Um, I was lucky then I was lucky to have some hard truths earlier on as I was going through teacher training, and to have some teachers who were saying, you know, that actually were I believe we're doing a really true justice to say, why are you believing me? I don't know everything. Why are you believing this? This isn't everything, right? Go see for yourself. What else do you like? Um, and so even things like a meditation practice, obviously I'm a Vedic practitioner. That's my preference, but it also doesn't mean I'm not out there exploring, trying tantra-based practices, Zen-based practices, Buddhist practices, because for me, the more that we understand, the more that we know, the more that I try, the more you actually just refine an understanding of what's available in times, at moments, in occasions. Um, these days, my personal practice, yes, I'll get up and I'll do a morning, you know, being practice. I'll get up and do a yoga movement practice, non-stylistic. I think as I've become more of a teacher, though, because you have more things I've learned and experienced since, right? I would say like more ingredients on the kitchen cupboard shelf than you can create as suits the occasion, right? If I invited you guys all over for dinner and I had this whole thing as let's I only ever make, you know, spaghetti and meatballs, all of a sudden now, there's more to life than spaghetti and meatballs. But at the same time, you know, Anthony might come over and go, well, I'm vegetarian. And Rory might come over and go, oh, I'm gluten free. And Darren, you might come over and go, I'm just not into pasta. And all of a sudden, I'm out of tools, I'm out of things to serve. And so as a teacher, I think we have, I'm going to say, a responsibility to expand our awareness so that we can be in support of our students as much as possible. And while I'll always practice my preferences and arguably share my preferences, it doesn't mean that I'm not um, learned, studied, or capable of sharing other ones and giving people the same sort of awareness that I've been given and the same sort of kind of hard lines that I was given of, you know, don't let this be everything for you because only you can decide what's valuable in a moment. So stock your cupboards well and let that be kind of the essence of how you serve dinner.
James, Michael, you mentioned teacher training. You are teaching people to be teachers.
Yes.
And this is in the Just Breathe method.
So our teacher trainings are primarily yoga focused, and so yoga and meditation focused within the narrative that most people who come and do our training want to be able to teach these types of practices either in a studio, in a community space. And so whether we would lead our traditional 200-hour teacher training modules, as you would find in any kind of studio around the world, we teach these. But at the same time, we teach our advanced modules, which are for people diving even deeper. Now, those modules include both yoga and meditation practices. They're probably not as in-depth as, say, you know, like a Vedic meditation training. They are more about expanding and giving people a really a steady and solid understanding of how practices like these can be impactful in a classroom or a studio environment. With things like Just Breathe, we do courses as opposed to training. So, you know, learn to meditate courses, introductions about styles of practices and breath work. And we do one advanced training that is it's a 100-hour training. We call it a Kaivalya training, a practice where we enable people to learn techniques to guide these practices. But perhaps you could say it's the precursor to a very in-depth teacher training. So you essentially, let's say you've tried the whole menu, and when you find the one that you really find is the tastiest, then this is the launch pad into then sending them towards trainings that they can really go deep in.
And where does One Giant Mind fit into all of this?
So One Giant Mind is a a great training system, and I believe that you guys are all friends or know Johnny and that system. I met Johnny years ago when I was in Australia and New Zealand. We were both kind of co-leading a big Wanderlust tour down there. I mean, what I really appreciate and like about the One Giant Mind program is how they've made it relatable and accessible in the way that it's shared. I believe that the community is built in a really beautiful way. Some of the teachers that are very dedicated within that community are great friends of mine. We all did the kind of very first training in New York 3 or 4 years ago. Some of our teachers in our courses, people like Pavlina Nirabecki, Darren, I believe you know Pavlina, are part of that community as well. One Giant Mind is an inspiration to a lot of the work that we do, and I think for me personally, it's kind of the nugget of inspiration at the same time then allows people to then see that and then be able to expand from it into all the other things that we share. But yeah, it's an extension of the family, I would say.
And what's coming up for you in the next year? What are you excited about?
I'm excited about many, many things. The past year has been a slightly different shift in the schedule. Obviously, most of my time I'm usually traveling quite extensively. Pre-pandemic, I was probably in 20 to 30 cities or countries a year, training, events, all kinds of things. This past year has been the gift of slowing down and being at home a lot more. But there are communities that I'm a part of that I do miss face-to-face contact. We do a lot of work in Europe and the Scandinavian countries. I have a lot of friends and family in the US and Australia. My parents live in California. My sister lives in California. My brother and his family live in Melbourne, Australia. So our family is quite international. So for the next year, I'm really looking forward to being able to reconnect in live environments. And then with the work that we have, we have more, all of our trainings are coming back in real life, which is going to be really exciting. We've done them all online on Zoom, and they've been wonderful. They've been amazing. We've been able to connect with lots of different teachers around the world who've been able to participate and guide and share. But I think nothing beats a live environment for things like a training, especially when you're going deeper and you have a lot more interaction and discussions that need to have. That's going to be exciting this year. And then we will continue to grow and to build out more with the app, as well as a lot of our podcast programs and content. And fingers crossed, I'll have a new book or two in the work coming out sooner than later as we kind of make our way through the next few months.
That sounds fantastic. Michael, we're just coming up to the hour. We've had a wonderful time with you. Thank you so much for your generous and expansive answers. You're a busy man. You have tremendous energy. We wish you well with all your projects in the future. And thank you so much for being a guest on the Vedic Conversation.
Oh, thank you guys so much. And it was so nice to be with you. And I really love and appreciate what you guys are doing and sharing.
Okay, thanks for sticking around till the end. I found Michael's experience of letting something as simple as folding a piece of paper develop naturally into something bigger a great example of letting things grow in a natural, fluid way without force or expectations. We hope you found the conversation stimulating and it might have raised some questions of your own. We'd like to hear about them. This season, we want to engage with you, our audience, and would love to know what topics and themes would be of interest to you. Also, would you like to be our guest? Perhaps you might be interested in coming in on the show and talking with us. We'd love to have you. Please share your thoughts and ideas with us with a direct message on our Instagram account. And for those of you who are not camera shy, please feel free to share a video with the hashtag #TheVedic Conversation. Goodbye.